All right, so this is the Ed puzzle to review some of what we did in the Chapter 8 test. And there's two specific questions we're going to focus on. Once we're done with these two, you're going to click off of the Ed puzzle after answering the questions and move on to the final piece of today's class. Let's start with the concept here. The concept of these problems is that you want to do a few things. You want to factor as much as you possibly can. You want to cancel out as much as you possibly can. And then you want to remultiply as much as is possible. But I'm going to tell you that after you do the factoring step, that's when you go ahead and find your restrictions. All right, it's a common misconception that we don't do restrictions until the end. So let's go ahead and talk about these 4 steps and make sure that you understand what we're doing. So first and foremost, what I observed on the assessment was that most of you were pretty good at factoring. So factoring out a 3x minus 3, they have a GCF of 3, so x minus 1. And on the bottom, there's a GCF, and that's x. And on the inside, we get x minus 1 as well. Now, the good news here, I'm going to use red to do any canceling. The good news here is that we're ready to do some canceling, but let's stick to our order. Let's stick to my coloring as well. We just factored. Now let's deal with restrictions. Now, the idea behind a restriction is this. The denominator is not allowed, cannot equal 0. We're not allowed to have that thing equal 0. Because if the denominator equals 0, the whole problem falls apart. So we have to avoid that denominator being 0. So here's what we have. We have two things being multiplied together. If either one of those things equals 0, so if x is 0 or if x minus 1 is 0, if either one of those equals 0, the whole thing equals 0 because there's this property called the multiplication property of 0 that if you multiply by 0, the whole thing turns into 0. So neither one of those things can happen. So x equals 0, what we'd actually change is to say x is not allowed to equal 0 and x minus 1 is not allowed to equal 0. So x is not allowed to equal 1. So here are our two restrictions, right? So as far as restrictions, now we have our restrictions done. Now we're going to cancel out whatever I can cancel. X minus 1 and x minus 1 cancel out because they are a factor in a multiplication problem. And done with canceling. And now we're going to go ahead and do the remultiply step. Now there's not really much to remultiply here because all we have is a 3 on the top and an x on the bottom. There's nothing to remultiply. But after this, I'm going to go ahead and say x cannot equal 0 or 1. And this is my complete answer. We have our answer and we have our restrictions, right? So that is how you attack this problem. You factor, you find restrictions, you do some canceling, and you remultiply if you need to, right? Let's go ahead and grab that concept here, and let's do one more. Now, this next problem looks, well, like a monster compared to the last one, but I think we're going to find that it's not too bad. We're going to stick to these strategies. So let's start with factoring. Now, first and foremost, something that I noticed on the assessment, I'm going to use red again as something to avoid. On the assessment, I noticed that people would see something like this, and they were common. They were common. They're not common factors, but they would be common items within polynomials, and they would think, man, we can cancel those out. Well, no, don't ever do that. That's not how this works. Hopefully we'll go over that in class, but for the sake of the video, that is not allowed, and you're not allowed to cancel things that are being added or subtracted. You're only allowed to cancel things that are being multiplied or divided. So we're going to go ahead and not do that, and we're going to factor instead. So because I've done these problems before, I'm going to go ahead and say this top left is x minus 2 and x minus 5, right? So I just did this one, just so we're clear. And the one underneath it is going to be x, let's see, minus 5 and x minus 3. And this top left one, x plus 6 and x minus 3. And on the bottom, I'm going to tell you on the bottom, as soon as you see anything like that in front of an x squared, you need to factor out those negatives, right? Oops. So get rid of that negative 1 right off the bat. And then we're going to be left with x squared minus 4. And I'm going to use the copy-paste feature here because I see a difference of 2 squares, right? This thing is a difference of 2 squares. So in fact, I'm just going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to erase that. The difference of 2 squares turns into x minus 2 and x plus 2, right? That's how we factor the difference of 2 squares. So factoring is all done. We're going to look for restrictions. Now we have multiple things here. I think I used purple last time. Multiple things here that could be zeros. If this is a 0, or if this is a 0, x minus 5 cannot be 0. X minus 3 cannot be 0. I have this one. -1 cannot be 0. We already know that, so that's kind of neither here nor there. We don't really need that one. We have this next piece, x minus 2 cannot be 0. And we have the last one, x plus 2 cannot be 0. For the record, sometimes you'll find that you have duplicates. And if you have duplicates, you don't have to list them twice. But we don't have duplicates here. And we have our 4 restrictions, right? So my iPad is starting to get pretty busy. So we have our 4 restrictions. I'm going to actually list them off to the side. X cannot equal 5, 3, 2, or -2, because any one of those things, if put into either this equation or this equation, will cause the denominator to be 0, hence wiping out the whole problem. So we're going to go ahead and say those are the restrictions, and because I need the space, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all of that writing, except I'm going to leave that purple marking up on the side here. So we have our restrictions done, and check. And now we're going to go cancel. Look for things that can cancel. Do you see anything? Yep, you should see these. And you should see this. Now look at that, right? You can cancel across. And one more. You can cancel lots of things out here, which is pretty nice. That doesn't always happen, but it happened here. So our canceling is done. And now we're going to remultiply. When I look along the top, the only thing left on the top is x plus 6. There's nothing to multiply it by. There's 2 things left on the bottom. -1 times x plus 2. So I'm going to remultiply that. -x minus 2. And I'm going to put my restrictions. I know they're a different color, but I think we can all live with that. And done. All right, so one more time. You have 4 steps: factor, restrictions, find your cancellations, and then remultiply.